Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Gavinsky's Tutorials. Today I'm going to do a video on this really cool little app called Midi Poly Grid that is available for Android, iPad and iPhone. So it's a grid style MIDI controller, and I'm really enjoying the fact that it's cross-platform because I use iPad but I actually use Android for my phone. So being able to have this on my phone and control synths and stuff on my iPad over Bluetooth is really fun, actually. And this kind of app works pretty well on a small screen, although obviously it's better on a bigger screen like an iPad. But I've also been using my second iPad with this, and then again controlling synths on my main iPad. So I'm going to do a walkthrough of this. And this is, by the way, only I think it's $3 for the iPad and iPhone version, and the Android version is not even $2. It's like $1.95. The developer is a really cool guy, lovely person, I think, very committed, very open to feedback. I really appreciate him. Guy called Andreas, so thank you, Andreas, for being you. Honestly, great dev. So, yeah, there's a lot more than you'd think. If you go into the app, you have a lot of different layouts that you can choose from, and these layouts will behave pretty differently as well, depending on whether you've set the scale to chromatic or quantized to a particular, sorry, if you've set the grid to chromatic or quantized to a particular scale. We scroll down here and we have more options, so I'm going to go through all these things. And so this is the layout page. And I'm going to let you hear some examples of this in a second, by the way. We click in here, we get to the MIDI page. Come in here, we go to the advanced page. It looks like there's not much here, but there are actually a bunch of different options here, including look and MPE options. So this can be an MPE keyboard as well. And in here, this settings page. You press this play icon to go back to the grid. You can also, you double tap that little thing up there to enter the menus. And if you're on the layout page, you can also tap on that preview to go into the grid as well. So it's got a little optional sustain button here as well, by the way. And it's just got a whole bunch of really, really nice little features. So first of all, I'm going to play you a few examples of it in action that I recorded earlier today. And as we go through them, I'll talk a little bit about what's going on in terms of the layout and what they're triggering and stuff. So here, this is set to MPE mode, and I'm using it to play a synth on my iPad, Phosphor by Audio Damage. Also very cheap little app and really nice little MPE synth. I really enjoy that. So you can see here, my movements on the y-axis are modulating some things like, first of all, controlling the volume, but also controlling cross-modulation between the oscillators in Phosphor. And you can see here I'm just using a chromatic keyboard, but it's set to a certain number of intervals on the y-axis, and we'll talk about that later. So also, I mean, I just really like the UI here of this app. It's beautiful. So this is another MPE patch, and this is playing Clave Grand Tomophone. So some vocals. So vocals, a lovely thing to play MPE. That's a really short little example. Here, this playing Clave Grand El Piano. It's a little bit quiet. I had the velocity turned down very low. So you can see here, this is Piano Tech Harp. And here, I've got it quantized to a scale, but you can still play in between notes. And if you want, you can completely get rid of the in-between notes so that you only have notes that are in scale here. Now, by the way, all my examples here are melodic, but this is obviously a really, really great app for finger drummers. And in fact, it was primarily designed for finger drumming, I believe. I forget which layout this is. We'll look at the layouts later. Oh yeah, this is the guitar layout, yeah. So if you look here, you know, E, A, D, G, B, E. High E, low E, there's like a guitar. This layout, I've given a few suggestions to the dev and I'll talk about them later. Okay, so let me just turn that volume down a little bit for me. Won't make any difference for you. Oops. Now, okay, let's go back here to Midi Poly Grid. So, who should watch this video? You know, normally I don't really go into so many details in my introduction, but I think I'm going to here, just slightly different format for a change. So before I do the walkthrough, I'm going to mention, you know, who I think should watch this video, who might be interested in this app. And I'm also going to mention just right off the bat a few things to be wary of, or a few potential frustrations. Frustrations aside, I'm really enjoying this, and I think at the money, it's honestly a little bit of a no-brainer. So, first of all, this video will be useful for you if you have this app already, but you don't really know how to use it. If you haven't really thought in detail about how these different drop-downs work, or why you might want to use one over the other. Or, you know, people who are not familiar with this app and who are maybe in the market for a grid-style MIDI controller that works on Android, iPhone, and iPad. You know, it's really nice that it works on all three of those. Not that many apps do. You know, Android is not as good a platform for making music as iPad. Then anybody who's interested in unconventional keyboard layouts. So again, you know, going in here, we have all these different options and they all look different, and we'll look at them later in the video. Again, anybody who's into MPE or, you know, polyphonic aftertouch and stuff, it's really nice that this can be an MPE keyboard, and it's very simple to set up, but you've also got a couple of options about how it operates. Who else? You know, it's nice that this has the guitar layout. Now here, by the way, when I flick through these things, you can see the preview changes, which is really nice as well. So yeah, it can be good for guitarists, but I've made some suggestions to the dev about how I think it could be more useful for guitarists, and I'll talk about that later in the video. Another thing would be if you are someone who composes music and you want to be forced into new ways of thinking about things. If you have a different keyboard from what you're used to, and particularly the way this works, the way you set up the keyboard, it just forces you to think in a different way, and you'll come up with stuff that you wouldn't have come up with if you're used to playing a regular piano keyboard. If you work with a grid controller like this, you'll be just thinking and playing in a different way. I think that's pretty interesting. Very useful, obviously, if you have a second iPad or an iPhone or an Android phone and you'd like to use it to control another device. Then definitely good for people into finger drumming. People who want to play with a quantized keyboard so they can't go out of scale. So we talked about that a little bit in those demos. And people who want to play with a quantized keyboard that does allow them to go out of scale, you can have both of those options. And then for people who want to play a completely chromatic keyboard like this is, we have all, 12 notes in here, but set up in a way that certain intervals or chord shapes will be very easy to play. So we'll talk about that more in a little bit. So basically, yeah, also anybody who's interested in isomorphic keyboards, so again, that's just, keyboards that are set up in such a way that you can play chords with the exact same fingering on any key. So once you learn the shape of a major or minor chord, you can just use that shape in any key whatsoever. And, I'll say one more thing. There are plenty of touchscreen keyboards for iOS, and generally they all have their own pros and cons. So this one I like because it's pretty powerful, but you're also not overwhelmed with setup options. So, for example, GeoShred can be a little bit similar to this, but first of all, I kind of prefer how this looks. But secondly, I sometimes just get overwhelmed by the different options that there are in GeoShred. Now, there are some things to be wary of or potential frustrations that you might run into with this app. So the biggest one, if you're an iPad or iPhone user, is that this is not an AUV3 plugin, meaning that I can't just load it in here like I can this AUV3 MIDI app. Well, it's also an instrument, Salome by Bramboss. So that is a disadvantage. That said, for these kind of keyboard apps, I can kind of tolerate it not being AUV3 more than I would for other styles of apps. Another thing, when you're using Bluetooth MIDI between devices, so, I have, as I said, connected this so that I was using it on my Android to control synths on my iPad. But Bluetooth, MIDI over Bluetooth can really be a bit annoying to deal with. Like at times I just found that, maybe I did something wrong in the order of connection, and then I ended up having to unpair everything and pair them again to get things working. But that is not the fault of this particular app, and it happens with other apps. So that's just something quirky about Bluetooth. I mean, it's even Bluetooth between two iPads is a little bit fiddly, but between Android and iPad, it seems even a bit more fiddly, but it definitely can work. And another thing that I've spoken to the developer about is that depending on your playing style, you might run into problems where when you're tapping, you might get a silence because you hit a gap between notes. And so I'm discussing this with the developer. He has improved this already, but I think it could be improved a bit more. If you're someone who likes to vibe play, as I call it, and I'll clarify that later, you might run into issues with this. So as I say, he has, Andreas has agreed with me that there's maybe room for improvement here. And I do feel that it probably will be improved. But depending on the way you play, you might not run into issues at all anyway. So now let's look at the UI. So here, this is the grid that you perform on. Now, I've got here this velocity slider, which is super handy. But we can also set it up so that there's a little bit of randomness in there, or we can set it up that velocity will be controlled by your position on the y-axis. So if I press lower on a pad, I'll get lower velocity. If I press higher, I'll get a higher velocity. We'll look at how to set that up later in the video. So you can see here, I've also got a couple of buttons, like here's a button to change the octave, and double tap here to turn on a sustain pedal. Now, I've said to Andreas it'd be handy if this was a slider, because some apps like Piano Tech, which I'm actually playing here, Piano Tech has an incremental sustain pedal. So if we look at Piano Tech's own sustain pedal, it's not just on or off. If I have it like set halfway, it's actually going to be less sustained than it is if I bring it all the way down. So these kind of incremental sustain pedals are great. They're really amazing once you get used to them, and especially very handy for touch screen musicians who don't have a sustain pedal, because a lot of the time I just want to turn sustain on and just have it on and just forget about it. But then I don't want it up full. I only want it up about, say, 70% for me is often a sweet spot. So he's going to change this, I think, to a slider. And that way it'll be fine for the needs of people who just want on or off sustain, but it'll also be good for people who want incremental sustain. So this part of the UI is, the whole part of the UI, the whole UI is customizable, really. So we'll see that as we go in here. So double tap here, and we're now in the settings pages. And by default, first we're on the layout page. So layout page, here we can choose between different presets. So it comes with a bunch of presets already set up. I don't think I've saved anything in any of these other ones. I think I've only played around with just changing things in one, and I've just been setting it up different ways. Note though, there are only 5 presets, which is a bit of an annoying limitation, and presets also don't have names. Now you've got a little button here, which is very handy, show preset buttons. So if you see here in the preview, and I just do really love how that preview page gets updated when you change things. So if I show the preset buttons, then I now have those on the right side of the UI, and I can double tap to jump to one of those presets. Super cool little feature. It's really, really lovely, that. So then we come down here, and this is just incredibly important. This part, I think, really, really needs to be understood. So let's just change this to chromatic. And let's look at the options that we have here. So chromatic, we're going to have all 12 notes used in typical Western music. Now, here we can set the number of semitones that are the interval between notes on the x-axis and y-axis. So if you see here, I've set it to an interval of 1 semitone, which is just exactly what you would have on a regular piano, right? So if you see here, this goes from a C all the way through all of those notes up to a B. Now, I could change this, by the way, with these settings. So, for example, if I wanted to have another C in there, I would just increase this width. And now this is going from C to C, right? Now, the interesting part is when you start thinking about these isomorphic keyboards, being able to change the number of semitones on the y-axis is just super interesting. So here we've got it set to 3 semitones. Right? But we could set it to anything really. So, and it's, each of these is gonna just inspire you to play and interact with this in a different way. So you can switch around between layouts if you want something to kind of challenge you, maybe practice skills, maybe make you think in a different way, and so on. But if you want to like become a very fluent player, you're probably going to pick 1 or 2 layouts that work very well for you, and you're going to learn all of the fingering for those. So like a different fingering for different chords depending on the layout you've selected. So here, for example, if I start from this C3 and then I have these 2, there we've just got a C major, right? But if I instead do this, that's a C minor. And so what I can do is I just take that fingering pattern and just move it right or left. So that's a C minor. Now that's a C sharp minor. That's a D minor. D sharp minor. And so on, right? So once you've learnt that minor pattern that works for this layout, you can play that chord in any key. And it's much easier than a piano keyboard. Let's click back on that again. So that's the basic principle there. And the options that we have here will change depending on the layout that we select. So the width and height, this is something that you're going to want to think about. For example, if you're using an iPhone, you're really not going to be able to have all that many pads and for it still to be playable. But also, let's say you're on an iPad, if you have too few pads, it's not going to be easy to play because you're going to be very limited in the number of octaves that you can play at any given time without using the buttons. But yeah, so you're really going to want to experiment with that. Too few pads. If you have too few pads, it's going to be hard to play complex chords because if the pads are too big, your fingers are just going to be having to spread too far. So you really want a sweet spot. You want it that you have enough pads that it's just going to be right for your fingers and your style of playing. So you're going to want to experiment with those. Plus, if you do get used to a certain setup, you're probably not going to want to change it that much. If your aim is to be fluent, and to be able to improvise well, say, for example. So here we've got the layout to chromatic, and here the scale is chromatic, but there is a difference between these, and you'll understand when we look at this in a second. So if I choose major here, well, we still have a chromatic keyboard. You can play out of scale notes. All these black ones are out of scale, right? But because the in-scale notes are highlighted, it's going to be easy to always play inside the key. But you've got that flexibility to go into the out-of-scale notes if you want to. And that's important because, sometimes you're going to need to play accidentals. But if we then look at a different layout, right? So if I change this, for example, to chromatic sequential, you can see here now this part has changed. So here we're just controlling the width and height. We no longer have control over the intervals. And instead, these are just stacked. So C2, C3, C4, C5, and so on. So that's how chromatic sequential is. Then we have this one, in key sequential. So here we've only got C major notes, and we don't have any repetition of notes. So it's different from the chromatic layout. If we go back to the chromatic layout, right, this first one, and let's just change it to chromatic scale. So if you look here, we have, for example, here is, an A sharp on the third octave. That's another one. That's another one, yeah? So you'll have notes in various positions, just much like you would on a guitar fretboard, right? Now, let me just change the scale back to major, and let's hit this and see what's next. So here we've got guitar tuning, but if you see at the moment here, this note is C. So the E, A, D, G, B, E pattern for the open strings on the guitar that guitarists would be used to, that is over here, but we can change that, right, by going into the settings. So if I go into the settings here, I could change this. For example, let's just change that to, well, I can keep it as a C if I want, but let's just change the bass note here to an E. And let's click in on this. And so now you see here, this first option is the E. So now this is really like a guitar keyboard, but it has the advantage that here we're seeing where exactly we have to play if we want to play notes in the C major scale. Now, the only thing is about this guitar layout, and I've passed this on to Andreas, when I started playing with this, I was like, oh God, this is so weird because it feels like I'm playing upside down. And that's because if you think about it, although this is the way a guitar fretboard looks, it's not really the way that you're going to think about it if you're a guitarist, because the way you bring your hand around, it's kind of like everything's backwards. So what I said to Andreas was, to me, it would make a lot of sense to offer an option for a mirrored layout. So basically flipping this on the vertical axis. But what would also make sense is an option to flip it on the horizontal axis for left-handed players. But, it's kind of interesting in a way. Like when I try to play this, it's like, whoa, it's very weird, but it's kind of familiar, but it's different. And it makes me think hard. And I don't know, there's some advantage to that, but I would definitely like those flipping options. Now let's click on the next one. So here we have a program change thing. So we could just use this to send out MIDI program change messages, let's say to some other synth or something, to select presets on that. Right. Now let's look at the next one. So here, these options here, these are things I'm not familiar with. Magic Tone Network, Express Pads, the various Express Pads. So Express Pads is, I think, a finger drumming technique. And when I looked up about this app, I saw that there is a YouTuber, a guy called Andreas something, who, maybe this is his system or something, I don't know. So he is into this Express Pads thing, so you could find out more by looking for that. If you just search Midi Poly Grid, there aren't many videos on this, and I think you'll easily find his YouTube channel. This one here, I think this is a system for melodic playing. And these other ones, these Express Pads ones, I'm pretty sure those are all finger drumming layouts. And I guess each one has its own little advantages. So as I say, this is not something that I've gone into, and this video is going to be kind of long anyway as it is. So yeah, go and search YouTube for Midi Poly Grid, and you'll find a bunch of different playlists, or there's a playlist with a bunch of videos that that other Andreas has made. So the developer of this app is also called Andreas, but there's another guy, some friend of his. So let me just switch this back to chromatic, I think. And let me just change this again. And I'm just going to put that width back up to 12 and a height of 6. So I'm still trying to figure out what I personally like with this app. I think I quite like this one on the iPad. Now, back on the scales, so there are a lot of different scales and modes and stuff, but what there isn't and what there should really be ideally would be a complete option for custom scales with just a little keyboard where you select which notes will be included. So yeah, that is hopefully something that the developer could add. Then here you're just choosing the root note for the scale, and here choose the bass note, the lowest note on the bottom left. So it's pretty flexible. Then here you're just choosing the octave, the bass octave. Then here you've just got a bunch of toggles to turn things on and off in this grid, the performance grid UI section. And so again, we can see all these immediately when we change them because of the preview, which is just a super nice feature. So we can have those octave buttons there, right? Or we can turn them off. So now, now the sustain button is bigger, by the way. So we can have that sustain button or not. And we can have a velocity slider next to the pads or not. And if we want, we can add a mod wheel slider and a pitch bend slider. Then here, you've got some options related to the color. I don't personally really care about color that much. You've got an option to reset here. And this is also a really nice look. So you can drag along here and you see the colors are just changing like that. Again, though, not something I personally care about, but I do love the colors here. And that makes this very appealing to me, especially for using these kind of chromatic layouts where you have multiple instances of the same note, because like if we see here that A sharp, for example, it's all this same pinkish color. So it's very easy to find like an octave up or an octave down and so on. Now, I also have a choice here. You can have the note names, right? C, D, and so on. Or you can have the solfege names, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And you can have MIDI numbers if you're a real nerd. Or you can just have them blank if you're just, you know, either very familiar with the keyboard or just, you know, bashing the keys kind of blindly, and you don't really care what you play, but it looks cooler without any names, you know. So all options covered. You can even have the GM percussion names, you know, low bongo, high bongo, and all that stuff. So let's see, just toggle that off again. This is really nice. Show velocity, so show visual feedback on the pad, indicating the sent velocity. So if I tap here again, so you see here, when I tap a pad, you see that these are all slightly different. And that is because I've got it set up here that the base velocity will be 46. So I've got it set pretty low. We could turn that up a bit if we want. But you can see here plus or minus 9. So I've got it set up that there can be a little bit of randomness. And so here it's just showing us the level of the velocity. You know, this was a lower velocity note than that one. Really nice little touch. Don't know if it's all that important or anything, but I like it. So next we click on this MIDI thing here. So this is super important also to understand. Now you have a little thing here, connect MIDI device. And if you tap this, that's also connect MIDI device. And so that'll bring up this little thing here. Now, by the way, you can also access this from the layout page, right? By tapping on this. So one piece of advice, if you want to send MIDI from this to a particular app or a particular device, let's say over Bluetooth or whatever, make sure that you've opened the app, or make sure you have advertised the other device before you try to connect, because the options that you see here will depend on what the app detects is capable of receiving its MIDI. But you can also, though, use this refresh button if you've added anything. More than 50 devices found. Okay, well, let me just... I'm just going to press don't allow for a second there. So these are the options that I have at the moment. And you can see here, I've selected AUM virtual. So I'm not sending to another device or anything at the moment. I'm not using Bluetooth. I'm just sending that MIDI into synths here in AUM. So if we look here, for example, at Piano Tech, which I was just playing just a second ago, if I click in here, you can see I have selected AUM destination here, and that is crucial, you know. So make sure that as a source on the app that you're sending the MIDI to, you've selected the same thing that you've selected as a destination here. Now, you'll get instructions for Bluetooth connections here. This is one of the things I mentioned earlier. You know, developer's just really nice, really responsive guy. Like I mentioned to him that I needed to use a third-party device to try and connect my Android to my iPad over Bluetooth. And I don't know why, I hadn't tried that before, but all of the devices, all of the apps, sorry, that I downloaded from the Google Play Store, none of them were actually allowing me to connect, and I was running into loads of problems. And I mentioned it to him, and he said, well, you know, maybe I'll try and add, you know, an ability to connect Bluetooth right within the app itself. And he did that, and then I was able to connect. But yeah, so you'll find the instructions here. The most important thing, look, advertise the MIDI instrument that you want to connect to in that device's MIDI settings. So, like, I'm not going to show you. I just want to do everything on the iPad for this video. But just to show you very briefly, there are different apps that are available to advertise devices, right, for Bluetooth. And I'm just going to show you how it works in this app, AUM. So in AUM, you would click here and then click here on this little Bluetooth symbol. And then you get two options: central, find and connect with devices, or peripheral, advertise this device. And so you click here and just turn this on, advertise MIDI service, right? And of course, make sure you've got, you know, Bluetooth on both your devices. And so you turn this on, and then hopefully, if all goes well, when you're in Midi Poly Grid, that device, you know, when you're in Midi Poly Grid on your other device, refresh here if needed, then you should have that option up here, new iPad, and just click on it, and hopefully everything will work. But remember that you're also going to have to make sure, you know, like if I had, for example, my Android phone connecting to this, and I had Midi Poly Grid on that Android phone, I would then get, after I connected successfully, I would have that phone, you know, it's like called Galaxy S22 or whatever, that would pop up here. See there, it's grayed out because it's connected before. That would pop up here as a source, and I would then need to route that in. And you can see these are old routings which are still there. And if I connected that again, they would be reestablished. So the only thing is, like I said in the introduction, sometimes connecting over Bluetooth, particularly I find between the Android and the iPad, it can be a bit of a ball ache, to be honest. I just sometimes found that I must have done something wrong in the order that I was doing things, and I lost the connection, and I tried all the steps that you know are supposed to take to get the connection working, and it just didn't work. And I ended up having to like unpair the devices again and pair them and blah, blah, blah. So sometimes it works very well, sometimes it doesn't, but I don't think this is anything to do with Midi Poly Grid at all. It's just some weird quirk of MIDI over Bluetooth, and perhaps further complicated by using Android to iPad, I don't know. But it certainly is possible. I have managed always to connect successfully, and the connection's been fine. So by the way, it's better to use Bluetooth for sending MIDI than Wi-Fi. The latency will be better, but you do, and you see a note about that here as well, by the way, but it is there as an option if you need it. So also here on this MIDI page, we have a few other settings related to what MIDI channels you're using and stuff like that. Now, the next one, though, is really worth taking a look at. Velocity mode. So choose how velocity values are created. So here we have three options: random, fixed, and y-axis. It's really important to understand these. So what I had it set to just now was random, and we looked at that, and you saw that when I tapped one of the pads, So let's just go back to that view by pressing this play button. Right, so the velocity was randomized a little bit, and it was gonna be 46 plus or minus 9, right? So this is where we set all that stuff up. So here I can change the range, right? So at the moment you can see that range is 37 to 55. So I could increase the range down lower or increase the upper range, right? Or decrease them, whatever. But I can also change this to just be a fixed velocity. Okay, and so here all the notes will be the same velocity. I personally would very rarely use that. I would always use random or y-axis. So y-axis is really nice. So let's look at the range here, 37 to 55. Let's just keep it as that. Let me click here to go back to the grid. So now if I play near the bottom of a pad, it's going to be on the lower end of that range. And if I play up higher, it's going to be on the higher range. Now, I could, of course, set it up that I've got complete range here. But in reality, whoops, I want to press this. In reality, that it might not be the best playing experience. So I usually set it to a smaller range. No, that's enough range for me for something mellow. That's nice. Okay, so that's the velocity range settings. And then we come in here and we have some really important stuff here in the advanced mode. So by the way, everybody, if you're enjoying this video, please smash the like, etc. Maybe write a comment for the algorithm. And if you like my channel and want to support my work, you'll find loads of links in the pinned comment of this and other videos. Thank you to everybody who's supporting me. I really appreciate it. So here you can just have no kind of advanced mode at all, or you can have this option, trigger notes. So if this is on, when you slide from one pad to another, then your notes will be triggered. Now, well, I'll talk about that later. I've just got a little suggestion for the dev about how this could be improved, but I'll talk about it later in the video. And he's going to implement what I suggested, I think, anyway. So yeah, if trigger notes is off, that will not happen. Let's just show you what that'll be like. So disabled. So let's jump back. As you see, just nothing happening, just one note being triggered. I definitely like to keep that on. And then you get options for channel aftertouch, poly aftertouch, MPE or MPE push style. So first I'm going to show you the MPE push style. So let's press this, and I'm just going to jump into AUM. And I'm going to bypass that piano there. And I'm going to bring in phosphor. And I want you to look at the way I've set phosphor up here. So yeah, like MPE is a really useful thing, but there's definitely a bit of a learning curve. And yeah, let's see here. What way we've got this set up. This doesn't look right, actually. Okay, let me just change this a second. No, there we go. Okay, so I want to use Midi Poly Grid to play expressively the volume of these oscillators. So I want it so that I can do things like this. So you hear this is low volume down there. And when I bring it up, the volume's getting higher, right? And of course, we can also do these pitch glides. So I have set it up so that CC74 messages will increase that volume. But there's something else that I set up here. Let's see. I think I did anyway. I think it's on this one here. Oscillator 2 cross modulation. Oh no, actually not on this one. I think on another patch. Maybe I was also using that to increase the amount of cross modulation. But yeah, not on this one. So let's go back to the settings. And so you see here, I've set a y-axis to send out this CC74 message. It's also called MPE slide. So there are a few options here, and what you choose is just going to depend on the way you've set up the instrument that you're trying to control. I don't want to make this about MPE. You know, people who are into MPE will already have some idea of this anyway, but just so you see, you've got those different options there. But there are a few other interesting options here as well, like row pads only. So I've got this turned on, and let's just jump into this and see. So I'll use the mouse so you can see what I'm doing. So here, if I accidentally maybe drag up too far, it's not going to trigger this note. That can be very useful actually. So let me show you what it would be like if that was turned off. So I turn this off and tap the little play button again to go back in here. So you see, maybe I end up accidentally triggering this pad and I don't want it. But, you know, maybe you want that, right? But you have the option. It's great that you've got the option. So I'll just turn that back on again. In Tune Zone, set the size of the pad center with stable pitch in % of the pad width. So you can make it easier for you to play in pitch even if you don't press right in the center of the pad. So you can adjust the range of that. And I won't demo that. Hopefully it's clear enough that that would be useful. There's also another little thing. The initial touch position becomes the pitch and slide center for that pad. So if I turn this on and go back here, if I now press up there, this is my center point now. If I press down here, that is my center point. Let's turn that off. So turn that off. I don't know why I keep, I feel like the position of this play button, it's not very intuitive for me. I keep forgetting that that's what I've got to press and keep trying to press other things. I don't know if other people have that issue. So you see here, if I press here, this is now an absolute position. So it's gonna send out that loud value, and that wouldn't happen if I had it set to relative mode. Okay, hope that's clear enough. You can also have in here a little note release delay. So the note off delay after you release a pad, how long that will be in milliseconds. I haven't personally found a need for that. Now, let me show you the other MPE mode. So I remember back when this was being tested, this was the way it was set up initially, and I really disliked it because I'm just used to things working that other way, but some people might like this. So here you can't do any, pitch bends and stuff. I don't really know why anybody would choose this mode. I really don't. I would definitely stick into the other mode for sure, the push style MPE option. And then we just have a few little things left. So wake lock, keep the screen lock on. Make the fader tracks touchable. So allow faders to be moved by touching anywhere on their track. I've kept that on. So that just means that here, for example, if I tap here, it will jump to there. If that option's turned off, it won't do that. Presumably, you're going to have to drag it like that. Tapping will not make it move. Nice to have the option, I guess. I probably would always keep that on myself. Show splash screen. So I've got this turned off. By default, this is on, and it just shows a little sort of cartoon dog. And then you've got to tap it to get rid of it. I didn't really see the point of it. It's cute and everything, but I'd rather just get straight into the UI. If you have stock notes or something, you can reset MIDI buffers. I haven't had any stock note problems here. Note the developers mentioned a bunch of people thanking them for their extremely helpful feedback, including yours truly. I really appreciate it when developers mention people who have helped them. You know, I often, like a lot of my time on this channel gets spent giving feedback to devs, and a lot of the time reporting bugs and things as well. And like very few devs give me credit for it. And in some cases, I've really made like suggestions that made a real difference to an app's functionality or look and so on, and very rarely get credit for it. And it kind of annoys me, to be honest. I'd really like to get that credit. I think it's fair, you know, and it's all unpaid work, like unless I'm being sponsored. So the least that developers can do really is give people a bit of credit. So I do really appreciate developers who do that. And yeah, and then if we scroll down here, you've also got some links, you know, link to the developer's website. The code for this is open source, by the way, so you can go and view that here. Okay, here, look, more information about Magic Tone Network and Express Pads. Go and check that out. And also email for the developer. So overall, very thoughtful and nice developer. Now, let me see. I've got a few little notes here on my phone. Just things that I want to mention before I finish and that I was worried that I would forget. So a few suggestions I've made, and some of these things I've mentioned already in the video, but they're important and I'd like to recap them, and some I haven't mentioned yet. So as I said, sometimes notes don't sound because you hit the crack. Let me just change this back. So let me just see here what mode we're on. Advanced. Let's put it back to trigger notes. And let me go back in here and choose Piano Tech again. Okay, so this is really, really radically improved actually from what it was because of my previous feedback to the dev. So what I found was that often when I was playing, like you see here, I'm tapping and there's no sound being triggered because there's a gap there. Now this is really a problem for me, and it might not be a problem for you. It depends on the way you play. But when you have an app like this, and especially if you're quantizing everything to a certain scale, and let's say you leave out all of the out of scale notes like we looked at that you can do, then, you know, in those kind of situations, a lot of the time you might just like to kind of freestyle a little bit and play a little bit blind. And if you want to do that, you really, really, really do not want gaps. Because what I found was sometimes I'd hit a gap and it just destroys my performance completely. And I've discussed this with the developer, and he did mention, like, he's already improved it. He's made the gaps smaller, but you can see that I am still able to trigger those. And I have found when I'm playing in a very kind of freestyle and fast and slightly careless way, that I do run into that problem. And that is really, really a problem for me. Now, he mentioned that getting rid of the gap completely might create some problems with the way MPE works. I don't know. I hope it's something that he can sort out, because other keyboards, including MPE-capable keyboards like GeoShred, for example, does not have that problem. If I have GeoShred, I can just, basically I could close my eyes, and just as long as I'm hitting the screen, as long as I'm hitting the pads, a pad is always going to be triggered. I guess if you're between pads, it'll make a guess. It'll choose whichever pad is nearest, you know. If I go in here, for example, and look at sequence keys, you know, I've got things quantized to a scale here, C harmonic minor, and I can just completely vibe play. And I could play with my eyes closed, and I'm never going to hit any cracks. And that is what I like in a touchscreen keyboard. So this is my biggest issue at the moment with Midi Poly Grid. Now, thing is, if you are a more careful player, or if you're playing slowly and stuff, this is not going to be an issue. If you are a finger drummer and you've only got a few pads, like in you know, these kind of layouts, that is very unlikely to be an issue for you. So I'd say that because I think Andreas, the developer, because his main interest, and I think really he built this app for himself, you know, initially. He came at it from a finger drumming point of view, so may not have realized that this kind of thing could cause issues for people who want to play melodic stuff and maybe want to have a lot of pads on the screen, and so on and so on. So that is my biggest gripe, really. But there's a couple of other things too. So it's not AUV3, as I mentioned at the start. That is really a pity. If you're not familiar, AUV3 plugins is just the system that iPad and iPhone uses, similar to VSTs or audio units on a desktop, that allows you to load multiple instances of plugins inside a host app. And this is very handy because you can have everything set up exactly the way that you want and open the session. Like if, for example, here, this, you know, all of my settings here, you know, I've got this sustain slider here. This is a very useful little keyboard app as well. But the pros, they have different advantages and disadvantages, this one and Midi Poly Grid. So if I save this, or if I just close AUM even without saving, and then I reload the last state, the next time I open the app, I get an option to you know, reload the last state. If I do that, this will appear exactly the way it was saved. And if I save this in different sessions, every time I recall one of those sessions, everything's going to be just exactly the way that I left it. That's really handy. Here, it doesn't have that. So, you know, you might need to sometimes, for example, make notes for yourself about what kind of preset you were using or what setup you were using. It's just not really as convenient. At the same time, for this kind of app, you know, a keyboard app, I'm a bit more tolerant of them being non-AUV3 than I would be for other styles of apps. Another thing, and that's something actually, I think, yeah, I've already mentioned it, you know, the difficulties with Bluetooth MIDI. Okay, fine. I won't go into that again. It's nothing to do with this app. It's just a bit of a hassle. But a couple of little suggestions. So, trigger mode. Trigger mode, when you have that trigger mode set up, so you remember that's what allows me to do this kind of thing. If you have large velocity differences set up, and if you've got it set, let's see where that is. if you've got it set for y-axis, so let's say it's set like this, and let's say I put a fairly big range, and let's go back to the grid now. So here, let's say I tap here, and that's my first note. And then I go up here, you can see that immediately there's a drop in velocity because I've got it set up for x-axis velocity range. And so that doesn't sound great. And then when I come back down, here it's going to trigger whatever the maximum velocity is. So I end up with very quiet runs up and then much louder runs down, which just sounds weird. So what I suggested to the developer is this. I think that if you're doing runs like that, the velocity used should be whatever was the velocity that was triggered when you hit the first note in the run. So let's say here that looks about, a velocity of around, say, 65 or something. It looks about halfway, 60, 65, something like that. That is the velocity that should be used for these other ones, maybe. Now, this will only be an issue, by the way, if you're using y-axis velocity. If you've got it set up for the random option, then that will not be an issue for you at all, right? Random. So that was one thing that I thought could be improved. And then the other thing, and I already mentioned it, was the mirror layouts for the guitar mode, right? So I just made a few notes for myself so I wouldn't forget things, but I think I talked about that in enough detail earlier, so I won't bother going into it again. And so I think, the only other thing I'd say is that because this is not a UV3, it would be really handy for iPad if it worked in slide over mode. So it doesn't have slide over mode. Now, I mean, if it did work in slide over mode, you'd have to adjust the width and so on and so on. It definitely wouldn't be as good as an experience as playing full screen, but it still might be handy for certain things. I think it'd probably be useful to have. So that's the walkthrough and my suggestions and criticisms and so on. And thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you found this useful, and I'll see you in the next video. Take it easy. Cheers.